Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in Daniel 9 and 6. And I loved 9. It was all about another vision, uh, another time where Daniel sees things, and those are always cool. But just like yesterday, at the end of 8, he said he had not been given the interpretation of the vision. But in 9, the angel Gabriel comes back to him after he spent a lot of time in prayer and fasting and in admission that Israel had truly sinned and been guilty, and in almost 70 years of captivity they still had not repented. So he spent a lot of time in repentance and prayer and was visited by the angel Gabriel. But chapter 6 is really what I wanted to get into today, because it is an issue, especially for law enforcement, that we talk about quite a bit, that I think there's still a lot of confusion on. And we've addressed it a couple of times in here, but I think today's the greatest example of this lesson that I've seen or that we have in the Bible, other than just being completely spelled out in Romans chapter 13. We still have people taking verses out of context and trying to make it fit the scenario of, should we obey our earthly government? A couple of weeks ago, I had a very dear friend of mine, in all honesty and sincerity, send me this video of a female who was out on the street, looked like she was with a group of protesters. I'm not sure, but she was saying that we shouldn't have to obey the government, and she was throwing out Moses leading a rebellion, which he didn't do, and she just had all these examples. But one example she used was Daniel, and she painted him as a rebellious person who didn't do what the government told him to do. And so this friend and I talked it out and worked through these, and basically we could prove her wrong with every single biblical example she pulled out, because she was taking them out of context. Now, I believe her heart was in the right place. She was just misled and turned and misled, or was misguiding other people. But the point in Daniel she was making was, when Daniel was told to worship King Darius, he refused to do it, and he rebelled and was thrown in the lion's den. Now, for the most part, that's in line with what happened, but it wasn't just because he was rebellious and refused to do it. Daniel was anything but rebellious towards King Darius and Babylon, and we see that in Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Daniel followed the rules and had so much integrity when it came to being a law-abiding citizen of Babylon. He was promoted to one of the top 3 people in the entire nation. Other people got jealous because he was so wise and he did so well that they tried to pick him apart and find any place that he had violated any Babylonian rules, any place where he was corrupt. They looked, they were tireless trying to figure out a way that they could dethrone him, take him to the king, bring him up on charges. But to their own admission, we read that they couldn't find anything in the Babylonian law that he had done, or that he could even be questioned on. His integrity was spot on. He followed the rules. He was a man of integrity. We need to know that about Daniel. He took Romans 13 to heart before there even was a Romans 13. To him, he was a man of integrity who was carrying out his duties and assignments, and he knew God had placed him there. And that was his testimony. He was going to do his job. Do your job as if you were working for the Lord. That's what he was doing, and he was doing it better than anybody else. So we see that when they realized they couldn't find anything, there was no way they were going to be able to trap him in anything, they said, well, he worships his God, and that's not a law in the Mede or the Persian rules, so let's make a rule for that. Let's just make something up, that way we can catch him in it. So they made this rule, and he did not follow this rule, because God's rule, the Creator's rule, trumps human rule. We should know that. It's like federal law trumps state law, and state law trumps the law of the municipality. The municipality cannot enact a law or a rule that violates state law and not federal law, because they have more authority. It's the same way with God's rule. God's rule has the ultimate authority over all rule. And King Darius himself will, in not so many words, but he will confirm this as we get on a little bit later in the story. So these people that come up with this, they even, not knowingly, but they even make the mistake of saying, when the king puts this rule into law, they say twice, this is the rule of the Medes and the Persians, and it cannot be violated. They even admit this is man's law. This is a law made up by man, and man says you can't violate this law. Not realizing that they're admitting it's man's law, but there's a law in authority above this law, God's law. And they don't recognize that. Daniel's thrown into the lion's den in 6 verses 16 through 28, the real familiar story to all of us. But then in 6:22, when the king goes and says, Daniel, did your God save you? And Daniel says, yes, he did. Daniel makes this statement when he's talking about God and the angels looked down on him, and they said, I was found innocent before him, and him being capitalized, meaning God. Daniel says, I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king, I have committed no crime. So God vindicates him from violating any of God's law, but God also vindicates him from not violating King Darius's law. He said, I have committed no crime, also towards you, O king. So God even tells us right here that man doesn't have the authority to enact a law that supersedes his law. He tells us right here. And then King Darius himself, he makes a decree to all the people, and he says, for he, capital H, meaning God, for he is the living God, enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. Dominion is authority and rule. King Darius basically says God's dominion, his authority and his rule will last forever, and he recognizes God's authority and rule is greater than man's authority and rule. Fantastic lesson. Tomorrow we're going to be in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, and we're going to read 2 verses, 22 and 23. Then we'll go to Ezra and read chapter 1 all the way through chapter 4, stopping at verse 5. So you guys be safe, and I'll see you tomorrow.